It is 2021 now, and the Earth is a Ball is back, as it's been for quite some time now. But we're back with Joey Vaca, episode 2 of Earth is a Ball Reacts, a little series that Joey and I are hopefully going to expand upon in this new calendar year. Joey, thanks for joining me again.
Thank you for having me. I'm enjoying it. You know, the first one was somewhat of a success for a trial run. I'm excited to do this again. We got some good stuff to get into.
Well, the first one we actually talked about LeBron and some basketball. So if you haven't seen it already, I suggest you check that out. But this week, we're going to talk about week 17 of the NFL. NFL season, minutes after it's completed, Washington football team just beat the Philadelphia Eagles. And Joey, I want to break this up into almost 3 or 4 segments here. So we're going to go with our biggest winner from week 17, which I think is the Washington football team, because they just needed a win to secure the worst division in football and host a home game in wildcard weekend, or as you like to call it, super wildcard weekend. Mm-hmm. But the Eagles kind of tanked there towards the end, benching Jalen Hurts and putting Giants fans out of their misery, because the Giants, if the Eagles won, the Giants would have been in the playoffs instead of the football.
Yeah, there was still hope for the Giants, and you definitely saw some angry Giants players on Twitter after Jalen Hurts was benched. So that's an interesting move by the football team. But I'll tell you what, there was a lot of talk that whoever was going to come out of this division was very obviously going to be the worst team in the playoffs. Despite Washington finishing the season rather with a losing record, they enter the playoffs rather hot compared to how they started off the year. They finished with, I believe, a 7-9 mark, which is not impressive by any stretch. But the way that they finished the season, significantly better than the way they started. They're going to deal with Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Bucks in that first round matchup. But I want to see if that strong defensive line is going to be able to give Tom fits in that matchup.
Now, just for some context here, we're not necessarily sure if the Eagles did it on purpose, taking Jalen Hurts out of the game. Because before the game, Doug Peterson said he wanted to get Nate Sudfeld some snaps in there, but maybe not when it was a 6-point game or a 3-point game.
Yeah.
Because Jalen Hurts obviously seems like their quarterback for the future. But in the Eagles context, they would have gotten this. They have the 6th pick now in the upcoming NFL draft, where maybe they could draft one of Jalen Hurts' former weapons in Devonta Smith at number 6. But if they were to win, they would have dropped all the way to 9. So that's just some context from the Eagles. But this is going to be a test for the Eagles fans that may or may not be friends with me, because they kicked me out of a group chat earlier, because I feel for those Giants fans, man. I don't know if Doug Peterson did it on purpose or not. He probably did, but Chris Collinsworth said it best in the broadcast. I just don't think I could do something like that. You know, tanking for a higher pick. I mean, look at my sweatshirt. Just trust the process.
You're one to talk.
Is Philadelphia the city of tanking now? Like, I feel like the city's going to get a bad rap now, because the Sixers have become infamous for doing it for Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons.
That's right.
But now, are the Eagles going to become like the tanking franchise now?
It definitely is. You know, you have to beg the question when you're playing in a game that ultimately means nothing except draft position. And in the NFL, there's talk about how the players constantly want to win every game, but it's the management or it's the coaches that are going to, you know, put teams in a position to tank. And when you're in a 6-point game with an opportunity to, you know, force your arch rivals out of the playoffs and you take out your starting quarterback, that definitely is going to raise some eyebrows around the league. And tanking's a very, you know, kind of icky subject right now. You talk about the Sixers and a lot of people complain that, yeah, they got their players, and I'm not trying to knock you, but unfortunately there hasn't been that playoff success that they'd hoped. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens and ultimately what becomes of that draft pick.
Now, I want to shift gears a little bit to one of our under-the-radar teams that came out on top after Week 17. Now, your Los Angeles Rams needed a few things to go their way. What did you make of the Rams Week 17 Sunday?
It showed why they're the top defense in the league. You put in John Wolford at starting quarterback, a guy who's never even played in an NFL game, and he's expected to start with the playoffs on the line. Very shaky at the beginning, throws an early interception, sets up the Cardinals for a touchdown, but the defense doesn't allow a first down until the third quarter after that. They even score a touchdown off of a pick six. So the defense did everything that it was asked and more. And eventually the offense got its legs underneath it. They were without Jared Goff and without Cooper Kupp, one of their top receivers, and who some think is one of the top receivers in the league. Not any of the top 3 or 5 or anything, but he's very productive for them. And it demonstrated just how strong that defense is. Now they're going to see a familiar opponent in the Seahawks, a divisional opponent in the first wild card round, and it's really going to be interesting because they split the season series, and the first time the Rams dominated the Seahawks offense, and the second time it was that kind of shaky Seahawks defense that really put the Rams in check. So it's going to be, the Rams defense is what's going to be key. Are they going to be able to contain Russell Wilson from making those big plays? Are they going to be able to keep DK Metcalf in check? They were able to keep Metcalf in check kind of in both matchups, but Russell Wilson was able to get the best of him the second time around. This third matchup is going to be super interesting, and I think one of the top matchups of Wild Card Weekend.
Now, the Rams needed the win to get into that wild card spot, and they also needed the Bears to lose. Even though the Bears are still in the playoffs, they needed some help from the Packers, who...
Well, actually, if the Rams lost, then they needed the Bears to lose.
Okay.
So a lot of people were hoping for that, not knowing the situation with the offense.
There were a lot of moving pieces going on week 17 in the NFL. But regardless, Rams won, so they didn't have to worry about it. But the Packers, man, they took care of Chicago. And Chicago's usually
their muscles.
That good defense with Khalil Mack and company. But Packers look like they could maybe meet up with the Chiefs and rival them in the Super Bowl. Two firepower offenses. I know we're going to get to the playoff picture in a little bit, the playoff matchups and maybe some predictions, but Packers look scary.
That offense is a force to be reckoned with.
Now we're going to get into our biggest loser. Miami Dolphins were in the playoff race. They had the playoff spot. All they needed to do was win. Were one of the 3 teams of the Ravens, Browns, or
the Colts.
The Colts. There's too many.
That's a brutal way to go out. Needing one of 3 teams to lose and they all win.
Or they needed to win.
Yeah.
And they didn't. But regardless, still secured a top 3 pick 18
That's
in the draft.
pretty impressive.
Brian Flores and company coming back. A lot of people are bashing Tua still. His first season in the NFL. I'll just say give it some rest. I know I talk about Tua enough on the Earth as a Ball. I don't need to waste any more time here. Why don't we get to the rest of the matchups in a super wild card Saturday and Sunday? I know you're
triple headers.
You're very excited.
That's amazing.
And it looks like, oh no, they're not playing the same divisions on the same day or the same conferences. That's disappointing.
There's a mix. Yeah.
I hate that. They should just play the NFC on one day, AFC on the next. It's not that hard.
It would make sense. I'll tell you what, though. A high point is we get 2 divisional matchups in the wild card round. We have Rams Seahawks, NFC West, and we have Browns Steelers, AFC North. That's a gift in the playoffs.
All right. Since you brought it up, I want to start with the Steelers-Browns game because the Steelers, they looked like the team to beat. They started off the year 11-0, and people were bashing Juju for dancing on the logos after they lost. And now they look like a significantly worse team. And the Browns, after losing Odell Beckham to start the year, have looked like a significantly better team than most of the teams in the AFC, with the exception of the Chiefs and maybe the Ravens and Titans. But do you think the Browns could pull off the upset? I mean, they almost clinched that AFC North division this year. I mean, I think the Browns are going to win. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely think the Browns could pull off an upset. The thing is, the AFC North is one of those divisions where every single game, it could go either way and it wouldn't be a shock. It's a very emotional division. Obviously, every game in the NFL is fought with emotion, but there's something different about the football that's played in the AFC North. And I'll tell you what, while the Steelers started off as the team to beat 11-0 and everything, they were winning games ugly. And I think context matters in the NFL. They were 11-0, but it almost felt like there was an asterisk next to that because they were winning games very ugly. And a win's a win, but I wasn't sold on them necessarily, even when they were undefeated. And now you come in, finishing the season off ugly too. I think they started 11-0. They finished, 12-4?
Yes, they finished 12-4.
Okay, so your last, 5 games, you go 1-4? And in comes a Browns team, which is, playing for their city, first playoff berth in like 18 or 19 years. Team that's playing inspired, going up against one of their divisional rivals, their arch rivals. I definitely think this is an opportunity for Baker Mayfield to make a statement and for Cleveland to make a statement as a franchise.
Yeah, first playoff spot clinched for the first time since 2002 for
Mm-hmm.
big prep guy Kevin Stefanski and company.
Yeah.
Also
Go
important to
Prep.
mention, the Browns beat the Steelers in week 17, 24-22, but Mason Rudolph
Yeah,
was under center for the Steelers. So once Big Ben gets back in the huddle, could be a little bit of a different Steelers team than what we're used to
that's
seeing.
right.
Jumping ahead, I know you touched on it a little earlier. We're going to bounce around a little here.
There we go.
Seahawks Rams.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned another divisional matchup, two teams, third time around. They split in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Russell Wilson was an early candidate for MVP,
Mm-hmm.
but he's kind of dropped off since then. But him and DK Metcalf could make something special happen on Saturday against the Rams. But it's really going to come down to the Rams defense, as you mentioned. I don't
Yes.
think I have anything else to say that you haven't said already about that matchup.
The one thing I want to say is I think it's actually going to be the rest. It's going to be the rest of the Seahawks receiving core because Jalen Ramsey plays alongside the best defensive player in the NFL in Aaron Donald. But you take Aaron Donald off that team, and Jalen Ramsey's undoubtedly the best defensive player, wiping away any opponent's top receiving threat. And he's kind of done that with DK Metcalf 2 times in a row, and I expect him to do it a third. So it's going to be up to the rest of the Seahawks receivers if they're going to be able to pick apart some of those young pieces on the Rams, their defensive secondary. And if they're going to be able to make those big plays and they're going to be able to let Russ cook, it's kind of what got them off to a hot start in the beginning of the season. And the offense is going to have to step up for Seattle if they want to beat the Rams.
Now, let's stay in the NFC. Do you think Taysom Hill or Drew Brees is going to start for the Saints against the Bears? I think if either start, they're going to beat the Bears because I just don't think Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles, any of them have it. Like I don't know how the Bears are in the playoffs, honestly. But I think the Saints are going to steamroll. They look like a team on a mission right now after missing like they've had 3 or 4 Super Bowl caliber teams in the last 4 or 5 years that have gotten there that close. And I don't know if there were some like missed calls along the way or anything like that. But the Saints,
or maybe some blown coverages, some missed tackles.
Yeah, or some tackles when there's not supposed to be tackles. But we're not going to discuss that. Saints are one of my. I think it'll be Saints Packers in the championship game, and pretty much there it's a coin flip.
We saw the Packers take care of business when that matchup happened in the regular season. I think it was like week 3. Now, seeing the shortcomings of the New Orleans Saints in the playoffs these past 3 or 4 years, I've been arguing that Drew Brees, he hasn't looked the same. Injury aside, he just doesn't quite look the same.
And, but even with the injury, he doesn't look the same.
Well, obviously, if you break half the ribs in your body, yes.
But so it's a significant drop off.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I said, maybe the Saints window is closed. And if they want a chance, this is definitely their last chance because I tell you what, if Tom Brady's going to continue to play, he doesn't even have to be great. He just has to play good with those pieces that he has in Tampa Bay. I don't see the Saints pulling away in the division going forward like they did this year. If Tom Brady remains a Buccaneer for the next, I think he signed a 2-year deal, so he's got one more. I don't know how long he's going to be there, but I don't think the Saints dominate the Bucs next year like they did this year. So I think, this might be, with the seed that they have, their last really good opportunity to push for a Super Bowl.
Yeah, you mentioned the pieces around Tom Brady. And actually on week 17, Antonio Brown was another big winner because he caught 3 shovel passes that gave him 11 catches on the day, 45 on the season, near $250,000 in bonuses. Could you imagine that? Just having to catch 45 footballs and he didn't even play all year.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
He got signed like halfway through the year. So you always forget, like Mike Evans obviously had a monster week 16 and he's their go-to target in the red zone. But then you're like, oh yeah, they have that guy Gronkowski without the brace on. They've got Antonio Brown, Scotty Miller running up the seam. Like
there's another guy named Chris Godwin. Not to
Yes.
mention they're handing it off to guys named Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. The thing is, if they can get their stuff figured out like they do sometimes,
They've
they're
been
a
up
force
and
to be
down all
reckoned
year.
with. And that's the problem. Inconsistency, it's not going to get you places in the NFL. They managed to secure the top wild card spot, and they probably got the best draw for wild card weekend matching up with the NFC East champion. Anyone knowing the 5 seed in the NFC was probably going to be the best positioned out of those top wild cards because they were dealing with the NFC East champion. However, there's no room for inconsistency. This is a hungry Washington team. They shouldn't look past them at all.
Now let's jump back to the AFC. We've got 2 more games. Let's go to Tennessee, where they're going to be running the ball pretty much all afternoon. Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, and then Lamar Jackson, J.K. Dobbins.
Mm-hmm.
There is going to be probably a total of 25 passes thrown in this game. But I think the Titans were close to a Super Bowl last year.
Mm-hmm.
And Derrick Henry is just playing out of his mind. Now, the playoffs are where you're going to see, the 25, 30 carry games really start to wear on Derrick Henry. I don't know where his conditioning's at in that department because he's had a historic season. But if Tennessee's defense can put it together, because their defense hasn't been as strong as it was last year, not nearly there. But their offense, the emergence of A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry just going on an absolute tear, duplicating what he did last year, and Ryan Tannehill having another year under Mike Vrabel. I like the Titans a lot, and I think the Ravens just haven't been as we talked about consistency a lot with the Buccaneers. I think the Ravens are in that same boat where they just haven't been as consistent all year, but they have been playing better football as of late, but they've also been playing worse teams.
That's right. You want to talk about a unit in the NFL that's not really where they were last year? How about Lamar Jackson, the former MVP, and that Ravens electric offense in 2019, kind of falling flat in 2020? I would say failing to meet a lot of people's expectations. I know a lot of people kind of expected them to maybe win that division again. Lamar Jackson to maybe put up strong numbers and maybe make another case for the MVP, and not really in that same department. The receiving core didn't look as solid. Lamar Jackson looked a lot more uncomfortable this year, almost as if teams figured him out, which is kind of what tends to happen in the NFL. You get figured out. But the playoffs is in his career where he has looked the most uncomfortable. So it's going to be, can Baltimore's defense stop Derrick Henry, and can Tennessee's defense make Lamar Jackson uncomfortable? And if they can do that like they did last year, we're going to see what happened. Derrick Henry's going to run all over them, and the Ravens offense isn't going to be able to get it done.
Now, speaking of quarterbacks who get uncomfortable when they throw the ball as opposed to run it, Josh Allen seemed like one of those guys last year.
Yes,
but this year he's come on. Sean McDermott, obviously an emerging Coach of the Year candidate. I think he should win, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think the Bills might be the only team in the AFC that could give Kansas City a decent shot at not making the Super Bowl. And I think they're one of the most complete teams in the AFC besides the Chiefs. Their defense with Tre'Davious White is ridiculous. Josh Allen might be a top 3 MVP candidate when it's all said and done. I mean, his ability to throw the ball, and I think it's mostly in part due to the acquisition of Stephon Diggs, breaking the single season receptions record for the Bills. And just that trade just worked out perfectly for both
sides. How about that? I mean, that's been amazing. That's been amazing.
For both sides and my fantasy team this year. So, I'm not going to complain. But the Bills are definitely one of the more complete teams in the AFC. And it was just on display against the Miami Dolphins this week. They put up 56 points on an elite Dolphins defense that has been solid all season. And then Josh Allen only plays the first half, throws 3 touchdown passes and 1 interception. But they got out to such a big lead so early. It was the game was over in the first half. And I just think if they come out with that same firepower in the frozen tundra that is Buffalo, the Colts have no shot.
I'll tell you what, I remember last year watching the Bills in the playoffs, watching Josh Allen in the playoffs. A lot has happened since last year, but he looked very visibly uncomfortable in the playoffs. And I wonder if there's going to be some of those nerves again. Obviously, they did a lot better this year than they did last year. They're going to be hosting a playoff game instead of visiting. But seeing kind of the pressure of the playoffs get to him last year, I think, that's going to be something to keep an eye on again. Is he going to crumble under pressure, and could that start to become a narrative? Because he started to make a lot of mental errors in the second half of last year's playoff game. I wonder if history could repeat itself there, and hopefully he could avoid that narrative of, not being able to handle the mental pressure of the playoffs.
Now, just one note on the Colts before we end off this episode, because I don't think they're getting past the Bills. But Phillip Rivers was signed by them this offseason. I don't think he's going to stay there next year.
Mm-hmm.
I think Indianapolis is a possible trade destination for Carson Wentz because their head coach Frank Reich, he was the offensive coordinator in Philadelphia when Carson Wentz went on his MVP campaign before getting injured. Eagles eventually won the Super Bowl that year and have dropped off in the years since then. But I look for Indianapolis to be one of those places, and then they could immediately turn into a contender. I mean,
Absolutely.
Jonathan Taylor went absolutely crazy week 17 with over 250 rushing yards, a pair of touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
They have the receivers, Pittman and Hill. Like they have
not
the
to mention that
pieces
defense too.
Yes. I just think
Scary
Phillip Rivers
defense.
is too weak. And when Phillip Rivers is your weakest link, that could be kind of easy to replace.
Yeah. And I mean, he's been good enough to put them in a position to, have a playoff game. But I agree. They replace that or potentially upgrade that. Contender. Absolutely.
All right, Joey. Well, that pretty much does it for this episode of Earth as a Ball Reacts. But make sure you keep it locked here on the YouTube channel because we are actually going to be doing more of these in the future.
Yes. And I'll tell you what, it's been a pleasure. So thank you very much for having me back. And I cannot wait for 6 playoff games this weekend. How about that? That's going to be something special.